as we mentioned last week, there's a online leadership retreat that will be taking place starting tomorrow. And it's got all kinds of speakers and thought leaders in the area of leadership that will be presenting, and you can watch it either at your own timing. They're all pre-recorded, but you have to register to be able to get in and see that. And so you'll see the link in the chat notes here. And if you just are trying to pick up some great new lectures and insights on leadership, especially in this environment we're in, great thing to sign up for. And then also, I mentioned last week that we're starting a new online Experiencing God class, and those have all been just wonderful. People from around the world join in. We've got all kinds of videos from my dad teaching over the years and interviews and so on. Even have a live stream where my dad and myself and my son will be available for you to ask questions live during the class. And so some really exciting things. And if you've never taken Experiencing God, but you've always wanted to, this is a perfect way to do that online with the Blackabys themselves. And so you'll see in the chat notes as well a place for you to sign up. And so hope that you'll be able to do that. Well, over the course of my life, I've had a number of people who have come to me and shared with great surprise and consternation. And they'll say, that perhaps they're a pastor, and they'll say, I thought my church was doing great, we were growing, people seemed happy, and then one day a delegation showed up at my office and told me I was fired. Or parents will say, I had these great kids, they grew up in church, they seemed to love Jesus and love us, and then one day they informed me, or one of my kids informed me, that they didn't believe in God anymore. They weren't going to church anymore. Or they were embracing a lifestyle that was completely foreign to everything that they'd been taught. Sometimes in business, people think that all is going well in their business, and suddenly there's an insurrection, or their partner suddenly goes a completely different direction, and they just didn't. And each time these people will say, I didn't even see it coming, and they're completely caught by surprise. And certainly, sometimes even in our nation, all of a sudden you'll see these ugly protests, or you'll see laws being passed that go completely contrary to the teaching of the Bible. And people will say, what happened to our country? It's as if I woke up one day and this isn't the country that I've always known. Well, of course, things don't usually just change instantly. Typically, things change over time. The problem is that when things are changing, we don't always pay attention. We don't see the warning signs. We don't see the red flags that should be alerting us. Something's not right with one of my kids, or something's changing in our nation. And oftentimes, unfortunately, God's people who have God available to alert them and warn them are the ones being caught by surprise. We're the people who shouldn't be caught by surprise, because we have the Holy Spirit dwelling within us, who knows the future, who knows what's happening, who knows what the danger zones are. But if we're not paying attention, we'll be victimized as well. Well, I want to look at a scripture. My father often would teach on this over the years, and it's about the concept of being a spiritual watchman. And there's several passages that talk about this. In Ezekiel chapter 3, there's a passage on that. Ezekiel 33. I think in Jeremiah as well, there's a number of places where God talks about being a spiritual lookout or watchman. And I want to just read a couple of verses with you from Ezekiel chapter 33. It says, the word of the Lord came to me. But by the way, you'll see this all through Ezekiel and the prophets. They'll just say, God told me this. God came and alerted me to this. And of course, the Bible is our guide. And if God would come to Ezekiel and alert him to his assignment, then don't be surprised, or don't dismiss the idea that God might just come to you and tell you a similar thing. And it says, Son of man, speak to your people and tell them, suppose I bring the sword against a land, and the people of that land select a man from among them, appointing him as their watchman. And suppose he sees the sword coming against the land and blows his trumpet to warn the people. Then if anyone hears the sound of the trumpet, but ignores the warning, and the sword comes and takes him away, his death will be his own fault. Since he heard the sound of the trumpet, but ignored the warning, his death is his own fault. If he had taken warning, he would have saved his life. However, suppose a watchman sees the sword coming, but doesn't blow the trumpet, so that the people aren't warned, and the sword comes and takes away their lives, then they have been taken away because of their iniquity, but I will hold the watchmen accountable for their blood. As for you, Son of Man, I have made you a watchman for the house of Israel. Well, let me just stop there and just say that this is a fascinating concept, and I think certainly in light of all that is going on in America right now, there's a desperate need for spiritual watchmen. And you can be a watchman in various places in your life, but of course in this time in which God was speaking to Ezekiel, it was in a time in which you didn't have aerial surveillance, you didn't have drones watching on the horizon for you, and yet it was a dangerous time because there were always enemy armies invading the land. Oftentimes they would send their cavalry on horseback that could go very quickly and suddenly just spring upon an unsuspecting village before you hardly had time to run for cover or grab your sword or get somewhere safe. And so, especially in times of warfare or uncertainty where there was rumors that there might be invaders in the area, you would appoint someone to be the watchman. You might have several watchmen depending on the size of the city. And you'd place that watchman up in the highest place, in the tower, on the wall, wherever he could see the farthest. And his job was to look out in the horizon. And if you saw dust rising up, and it signified people on horseback racing toward your city or village, or maybe it represented a whole army marching to attack the city. The moment that you saw something that looked amiss, something that looked dangerous, you would grab your trumpet, your horn, your shofar, whatever it was that made the most noise, and you'd blow it with all your might. And the people working out in the fields, the farmers working and laboring around the city walls, the moment that you heard that trumpet blast, you knew that your life hinged on the next few seconds. What were you going to do in those seconds? And most of the time, you didn't take a couple of hours to clean up your house and make sure that you had everything put away in your wall safe. You grabbed your loved ones and maybe grabbed whatever valuables you had right at your disposal, and you ran with all your might and got into that city as quick as you could, because at a certain point they're going to draw up that drawbridge, they're going to seal the wall, and if you're not in the city when they do that, then you're on your own when these enemy armies come. And typically these invaders would come into the town, the farmhouses, and would kill, assault whoever they could find. They would steal everything and typically burn down your house. And so it was crucial for a watchman that if you're going to have a watchman and everyone's life hinges on him doing his job, then you don't just put anybody as a watchman. You don't just say, who volunteers to be a watchman? This guy is sleeping all the time and half drunk most of the day. You're not going to put him as your watchman. There's too much at stake. People's lives may hang in the balance. You found the most trustworthy person, hopefully someone with good eyesight, someone that wasn't constantly taking breaks or checking for text messages on his cell phone. You want someone who's looking out on the horizon, constantly scanning and watching for any sign of something unusual, some kind of evidence that there's something going on out there in the distance. And of course, the farther out you saw, the sooner you could respond, the more time you had to react. Well, God was saying to Ezekiel, you need to be a watchman for people as well, not just looking for physical enemies, but there are many spiritual enemies. And of course, Jesus said in John 10, as we saw recently, that there are people that are thieves, they're robbers, there are people that will come to kill and steal and destroy, and there are false prophets, there are people coming and trying to take you away from God and your belief in Him and his word so that you can follow their lies and follow them to destruction. And so God is looking for people who will be watchmen. And a couple of places just to mention, just to kind of apply this. And one of those areas is certainly in your own family. Now, if you're a parent, you need to be a watchman on the walls of your family, of your home. And whether you're a parent or maybe you don't have kids yet, maybe you're not married, but maybe you're a grandparent, but the family that God has placed you in, maybe it's your parents you're watching out for as they get older. Maybe it's brothers or siblings or other nephews or nieces. But whatever family setting God has placed you in, are you a spiritual watchman who's watching to see if the enemy is coming? And certainly in our day, young people, there are so many different philosophies and worldviews and unbiblical opinions about life that are just bombarding our kids in college. Of course, we've cited this before, but perhaps as many as 70%, 66 to 70% of kids who grew up going to church will leave the church before they graduate from college. And what's happened? Well, they go to university and they have a professor who's an atheist, and he mocks the Christian worldview. He declares that the Bible is riddled with mistakes and is not true. And these kids who've grown up in our Sunday school classes are suddenly being bombarded with lies and untruths. And there may be a college roommate who is pushing against their moral values that they've been taught in their home and in their church. And as that's happening, there needs to be a spiritual watchman who's watching out over the lives of those kids to notice the first sign that something is amiss. Maybe those kids start coming home from school and they're just going up into their room and closing their door and they're not talking to anyone. Maybe they start resisting getting up in the morning on Sundays to go to church. Maybe this child was always telling you everything going on in their life, and all of a sudden they don't want to talk anymore. A spiritual watchman is watching for any signs that something has changed, that perhaps something new has entered into this person's life. I know when our kids were growing up, our home was kind of the happening place. All of our kids' friends wanted to come to our house. We liked that. We encouraged that. And I remember my daughter had a couple of friends over, and we'd be listening in to the conversations that Carrie was having with her friends. And we might have set some rules out where I remember one time Lisa had said, okay, here's some cookies. Each of you can have 2 cookies while you're here. Just help yourself, but just take 2. That's all you should be having before your dinner. Well, before long, they've had their 2 cookies, and the girl is saying to my daughter, Carrie, why don't you go and get us some more? And we can hear Carrie saying, well, Mom said we'd only have 2. And their friend is saying, yeah, but they'll never know. Go get some more. I want some more. Well, we're making mental notes. Don't have this friend back. Don't let our daughter hang out with this child. She's trying to encourage our daughter to disobey her parents, to be sneaky and conniving and deceitful. And so we wanted to know what kids were circling around our kids, because if they were a good influence, if they were wholesome, if they supported what we wanted to happen with our kids, we thought that was great. Let's have them around all the time. But we also knew that there were all kinds of dangers circling even young kids that we wanted to make sure we knew what was happening. Obviously, be watching your kids and what they watch on their phones or in the internet, so that you can make sure that they're not suddenly having their mind filled with different kinds of thoughts and sinful images that you're not even aware is taking place. I remember with my kids, I would regularly, even as they were teenagers, just schedule time to have lunch with them. And there were different restaurants that we would go to. And if I wanted to talk to my boys about girls, I went to kind of a more private restaurant that wouldn't embarrass them. If we were just going to talk about, sometimes drugs were happening with some of their friends, and there was a fast food place, we'd talk about drug issues. And so I remember my kids got sort of onto me after a while. And one day, my son Mike unexpectedly had a day off from school, and I had said, well, why don't we go have lunch since you're going to be home today? And he looked at me and just said, well, which restaurant are we going to? And he knew whatever restaurant we went to would pretty well alert him to what the subject matter was going to be. But I wanted to be talking to them. I wanted to be listening to them. And I wanted to prepare them. And when they got into secular schools, I wanted to ask, well, what are your professors saying? And what's their stance on the Bible and the Christian faith and on the moral stands we've taught you? And I was always just watching to say, sometimes we talk a lot to our kids, but we don't ask them questions, or we don't ask them. We talk about sports, we talk about the weather, we talk about politics, but we don't talk about spiritual issues. And I wanted to always know what the pulse was of my kids' spiritual lives. Well, also, if you are a leader or you work in an organization, whether you're the leader or not, you could still be a spiritual watchman. The king isn't the one who stood on the walls as a watchman. There was someone in the ranks that was trusted and valued that would be put on those walls. And so whether you're in a company, maybe you work in a business, maybe you work for a nonprofit organization, or maybe just a professional office, but ask yourself, why has God put me in this company? Why has God put me on this street in my neighborhood? How can I be a spiritual watchman for the people that I come in contact with? And I know certainly as a boss, I don't want to be caught by surprise. I don't want to suddenly get bushwhacked one day by some staff that are all upset about something, and it's the first I've heard about it. There are certain books that make the rounds, there are certain philosophies that get put across YouTube or other places, and all of a sudden everybody is watching this, everybody's talking about this issue. Maybe it's a popular video that came out that is sharing some truths that are not true, that are false, and now everybody's talking about it. And maybe if that's happening, I want to know what is influencing my people. And I've read several books, not because I thought they were any good, but because I knew they were influencing people that I was leading. And so I wanted to be familiar with them. I'll never forget a friend of mine. He works in the marketplace, and his oldest son had been reading some books that were leading him astray. And so my friend was reading all these books, and he was also reading a bunch of very high-level apologetics books. Both my sons got PhDs in apologetics. This man's books he was reading, and these were textbooks for PhD-level apologetics classes. And I remember saying to him, well, I'm really impressed with you. Here you are, you're in the IT industry, and yet you're reading, this is kind of out of your field to be reading these PhD-level apologetics books. And I'll never forget his response. He looked at me and he said, but it's for my son. In other words, he'd read anything so that he was informed and able to help his son as his son was being bombarded by some sinful anti-Christian philosophies. And so if I'm in an organization, if I'm leading it, I've always got my ear to the ground in case there's some dissension, there's some talk going on about some negative things. Sometimes if I'm in a staff meeting and I notice that one of the people on the staff just seems a little owly this week. Normally they're very pleasant, they're upbeat, but boy, today they seem very defensive, they seem grumpy. Maybe that I just need to go. I haven't really spent much time with that staff person lately. Maybe we should have lunch. Maybe I should invite him to my office and just check on him to make sure he's doing okay. I'm watching. Sometimes the staff meeting, everything's very harmonious, and then there's other times you just sense there's tension in the air. There's some things going on. I used to travel a lot, and so I had a great administrative assistant named Phyllis, who always had her ear to the ground, and I would just tell her, Phyllis, I'm trusting you you sort of know the scuttlebutt of everything that's going on in this office, and so if you sense there's an issue, just let me know. And a number of times she would come and she would say, Richard, I think you really should have lunch with so-and-so. He stopped by this week to see if you were in, and he just seemed a little concerned, and probably wouldn't be a bad thing just to check in with him. I want to encourage you. There's a lot of things you can do so you're not caught by surprise by your kids, by employees, and certainly in the church. There are evil influences coming in that would love to just turn the church away from the truth, from what matters. And oftentimes that begins by just people starting to attend your church. I'll tell you what, when I pastored a relatively smaller church, um, we wanted members. We wanted new people to come, but we never accepted people into the membership without me talking to them first and checking them out. And if I went and talked to someone, and they'll always put on their best face, and they'll tell you what a great preacher you are, and how delighted they are with your church. They finally found a church that preaches the truth and the Word of God. Whenever someone would tell me that, they would say, we've been looking for a long time and just haven't found any churches that we feel like are up to the right standard. They thought they were complimenting me. But for me, that began raising all kinds of red flags. And I would say, well, how many churches have you looked at? How many churches have you been attending? And I might find out, well, over the last 4 years, they've gone to 6 different churches, and they just never liked the pastor, never liked the preaching. And I know right away, it's just a matter of time until they don't like mine either. They have a track record of dissension, of division, of a critical spirit, of a lack of teachability. And so I don't want to introduce them into our church. I'm a shepherd. I'm trying to protect our people from divisive, critical, negative people. And so sometimes we actually invite in the very people that will be causing all kinds of disruption in our organizations in the days ahead. And I'm listening and I'm watching and I'm walking the shop floor, if you will, just being available. And oftentimes, early on especially, if there's concerns or questions or misunderstandings, I can't tell you how many times I've discovered the misunderstandings. And it always blows my mind sometimes where people will think, well, they'll say, well, I thought that everybody was doing this, or I thought that we weren't allowed to do that. And you realize, you think to yourself, now, where would you have ever gotten that idea? And yet here's someone all upset, talking to others, spreading things that aren't true. And then all of a sudden you realize, well, wait a minute, that's just based on falsehood. And then you share truth. But if you're not paying attention, if you're not walking the floor, if you're not available to your people, then those lies and misunderstandings, they spread, they're believed. People get upset. They start watching for other negative things as well. And before you know it, you've got a prairie fire going, raging all over your organization. And you think to yourself, what happened? Well, there were signs that there was concern, that people were becoming upset, but you were racing in and out and you weren't paying attention. And so a spiritual watchman is someone who's paying attention. They're watching for shifts in attitudes and behaviors. They're watching for red flags. If there's anything I've learned over the years is to take red flags seriously. Even sometimes just in a relationship, maybe a relationship even with your spouse and with a child or with a friend. And someone makes a comment that really is not like them. That's just unusual for them to be that abrupt, that harsh, that critical. And a lot of times we kind of blow it off and just say, well, they're just probably having a bad day. A couple of weeks later now, you've got a roaring fire and you realize, wait a minute, that comment that I heard, that red flag that I noticed, I should have gotten on it then. Things were still not in a raging inferno yet then, but I didn't address it. I didn't deal with it. I didn't talk to anybody about it. And now it's out of control. Now there's no turning back. And so as a spiritual watchman, especially in our country today, I find sometimes we're slumbering. We're distracted. We assume everything's fine. And I learned as a leader that just because no one has come in my door and complained doesn't mean everything's fine. I've got to go out my door, walk among the people, talk to them, and then I'll know. Have a better idea at least if things are okay or not. But sitting in your corner office as the boss, and because no one has sent any complaints, you're foolhardy to just assume everything is fine. And lastly, I would just say be praying. And certainly it's the most important thing because God does know if there's a problem. And God does know if something is going on, if evil has found its way into your church or your organization, your family. And so take time to pray over your family members. And each one just say, God, how is this child doing? From what I can tell, they seem to be doing all right, but you know what's in their heart. You know what's in their mind. You know what they're facing when they go to school. And they're not telling me about what's going on at school, but you're there. You see it yourself. You know what's going on. And so just person by person, pray through and say, God, should I be concerned? There are things only God would know, but as you pray, God can put a burden on your heart to say, yeah, this child you need to draw closer to right now. They're going through some things. They don't feel like telling you all that's going on, but there are some issues, and get as close as you can and spend extra time with them. And pray for all your direct reports at work or the people that share cubicles around you. And just say, God, if you put me right here in the middle of this office space, then I'm just going to assume that you want me to be a spiritual watchman over all of my colleagues in this area. And maybe I just need to sometime just find a tactful way to say, hey, if you ever need someone to pray for you or encourage you, I want you to know I'm available to you. And you may have no idea how powerful that might be in someone's life. And so this week, as you are praying and asking God, why did you put me in this family? Why did you put me on this street to live in? Why am I in this church? Why am I in this class, Sunday school class at this church? Why am I working at this company? Why am I working down this hallway with these other employees? God, just let me be a spiritual watchman over this hallway at work or over this street where I live. But God is looking for someone he can trust to keep their spiritual eyes open. And then that they know you will respond. You'll sound the alarm. You'll talk to people. You'll pray. You'll intercede. You'll do whatever you can. I'll tell you what, in America today, we need spiritual watch persons like we never have before. I think that the church has been caught a bit unaware. A lot of evil has crept into society in North America, and the church has not been paying close enough attention. I think some things have happened to get our attention, to wake us up. And now I think God is putting out a call to say, will there be people I can trust to be spiritual watch persons? So this week, take some time just to do a little inventory. Who are the people God has put in my life that God may want me to be giving extra care and watchfulness over, so that perhaps I can help sound an alarm when some evil thoughts and ideas and viewpoints are creeping in that could destroy that person's life. Pray, God, use me this week to alert people to the danger that's coming. And then, Lord, help me to just intervene and walk alongside and make a difference in someone's life this week. I pray God will use you this week. If you ask God to open your eyes, your spiritual eyes, you might be quite surprised at what you see. So be a spiritual watchman this week, and I'll look forward to being with you next week as we look again at an important scripture that talks to us about how to live our lives in these very tumultuous and confusing times.